Hello, it's Kristen. This is going to be the first video in a new series of videos where I read series. So yes, my plan is to, in each of these installments, pick a different trilogy, quadrilogy series and read all the books in that. And yeah, share my thoughts like a regular reading blog. So for the first series I'm going to read, I thought I would go for one that has been on my TBR for quite a while. I have all 3 books in this trilogy, even though I've not read any of them. None of these are like rereads for me. So these are all new, but I'm excited to get to them. It is a fantasy, and I've not read a particularly political fantasy in a while, so I'm excited to delve into this world, and that is the Tearling trilogy. This is the first book, The Queen of the Tearling, by Erika Johansen. Very excited to get to this one. I've heard very good things in general, but also not been spoiled for anything over the years, so I have no idea what goes on particularly, but just knew that I love female-centered fantasy written by women, is more my kind of thing than fantasy written by men, if I'm being honest. You probably would have gathered that if you've seen previous videos on my channel. I do generally read more stuff written by women, and particularly fantasy, I have a lot of issues with, and this isn't to say all male writers who write fantasy, but a lot of fantasy that I've read that's written by men, whether I've generally enjoyed it or not, tends to have sexism and misogyny in it, whether the writer is or not. It the characters are, and there's often sexual violence towards women, whereas, not to say that fantasy written by women doesn't have that in it, but I have found personally in the things I've read that it tends to be handled more delicately, more sympathetically, just in a more nuanced, careful way. I don't know if this includes anything like that, but that's just explaining why I like female fantasy. So this one is about a woman called Kelsey, I believe is how you pronounce her name, and it's her 19th birthday, and on her birthday a bunch of soldiers come for her. She is supposed to inherit a kingdom, I believe, and so I believe then the whole politics of it is, will she inherit the kingdom and claim her throne, or will she be, I don't know, I guess assassinated or killed by someone who doesn't want that to happen and is trying to lay claim to her throne instead. That's pretty much all I know, and that's purely based on the blurb. I'm going to get into this evening, and hopefully it'll really grip me and I'll be able to read this over the next few days. So I'm only 1 chapter in to The Queen of the Tearling so far, but I just wanted to say I think it's quite a strong opening chapter. It immediately puts us in the story, gives us a bit of background for the characters, immediately gets the characters moving and on their journey, and throws in enough questions, or we, as well as Kelsey, the main character, get given hints of things, or characters say stuff that there's obviously more meaning to, which Kelsey obviously picks up on and is like, they're hiding something from me. That's a secret. I want to know what's actually going on. I'm curious about like the rest of the book. Also, I've seen some people talk about how the main character's a bit not like other girls, and I do see that, because like already she's had a conversation with one of the guards about how she's not like other girls in that she was brought up to like ride a stallion, and they brought her a mare because they were like, we didn't know if you could even ride, we thought you were just like out here learning, reading books and sewing and stuff. And she was like, actually I've been taught how to use a knife and things like that. So I do already see where that not like other girls element is coming from. But I mean, it could annoy me later, but at the moment it's not annoying me because, like, I guess it is kind of valid for her to say she's not like other girls because she has been brought up in a very different way. So it's not bugging me at the moment, but perhaps it might if it continues. But yeah, I'm intrigued. I don't necessarily love Kelsey as a character yet. She'll probably grow on me, maybe not. But I do like that she's quite proactive, and when people say stuff to her, she'll talk back. So yeah. I love a political fantasy, and Kelsey is making some bold power moves, and I'm here for it. I'm up to the point of book 2 within the first book, and I'm really intrigued where this is going and what the fallout of what Kelsey is doing is going to be. So yesterday I finished reading The Queen of the Tearling, which is the first book in the trilogy. I enjoyed it. It's quite slow in that, like, there is action, there are points of action and stuff that goes on, but it's not very action-packed. If you're looking for an action-packed fantasy kind of novel, and you don't like slower, more political fantasies, I wouldn't recommend this. But if you do enjoy like the day-to-day and bigger scale politics of like a kingdom, then I think this one's good for that. I in recent years have got much more into wanting to read about like, or watch on fantasy shows like political military stuff. I find politics and like army war stuff really interesting to read about. I think it's because it's more like strategy and like swords and magic rather than like guns stuff, is the what I'm more drawn to in terms of like fighting and military and army things. So yeah, I enjoyed this. I think I'm gonna give it 4 stars. I liked the characters. The not like other girls thing that I said didn't particularly bother me at the beginning, but I didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't find it that bad. I think I was expecting it to be worse based on the review that I'd read, but just to my taste. And I'm very much I hate people who say they're not like other girls. I didn't find it that bad, to be fair. I am very interested to see where the next one is going to go, and where Kelsey's journey is going to take her.
What I do find interesting, this is spoilers, but I mean this whole vlog is going to be spoilers because I'm reading a whole trilogy and I want to talk to you about each of the books. I thought this was like fantasy world set, not even set in the past, because I thought it was like complete fantasy world, but with more like perhaps medieval kind of setting. But this is actually set in, I don't know how distant, but a distant future of our world, because I realised this at the point where Kelsey's talking about some history, and she mentions when William Tear came over in the Tear crossing from America, and the British and Americans crossed to the Tear and set up this new civilization. And so I was like, oh, hold on, that's our world. I'm a bit confused. And then they were talking about like technology and things like advanced medicine and like ebooks and things, which have since like disappeared. So this is set in a future where something's clearly happened that means that they again don't have technology or advanced medicine and stuff, and they've regressed to like a medieval kind of standpoint, in that it's all horses and carriages and swords and knights and kingdoms and queendoms and castles and keeps and things, which intrigues me. I don't know if like we'll ever learn what really happened, or if that was just a fun setup in that she wanted to write a fantasy novel, but also with a bit of a twist, in that it's not just a fantasy medieval-esque land. It's that, but in our future. I just thought that was interesting. But anyway, yeah, enjoyed this one. Thought it was a good political fantasy. I'm excited to read the next two, as I said, which I'm going to do soon, because I think I want to just keep reading them while they're fresh in my brain. I took a break to read some other stuff, just as a bit of a palate cleanser, or just, something different to read. Now I am back at it with Tearling trilogy. So this is the second book, The Invasion of the Tearling. It's around the same sort of size as the previous one. They're all a similar sort of size. So obviously we left off with the threat of war and the armies, and yeah, just by the title, The Invasion of the Tearling, I'm assuming bad shit is going to go down. So I've mentioned how these books are set like far in the future, which I didn't realise when I started them, but there are references to like America and Britain and technology and medicine and things. And while there had only been references so far in this book, in an earlier chapter, we fully just like had a whole half a chapter flashback, which I guess is still in like our future, because I think it was supposed to be like 2050 something, but obviously is in the past still in this book, and it was very like dystopian, like the beginnings of, I guess, the end before they had what's called the crossing in here, and I don't know how I feel about it. I don't know if it's just like the part of me that didn't know that this was a thing, that just thought that the series was like high fantasy medieval-esque setting, if it's still like that part of me that's a bit iffy about it actually being like our world, and because I want like straight fantasy, I'm a bit unsure of this like flashback to more our time, but with some differences. I'm not sure how I feel about it. I'm unsure. I'm still enjoying the series. But yeah, not really coherent thoughts there. But just wanted to do a bit of an update because I've not been reading a ton lately. It's taken me like a week to read 100 and whatever pages of this book just because I've not been in the mood for the past week to do anything really. So I just wanted to give an update so I had some content for this vlog. So it took me like a week to read the first 100 pages of this, and then just yesterday I read almost 100 pages. So it just goes to show, if you actually pick your book up and read, that helps. Who knew? So something I just wanted to mention that probably maybe won't bother or even necessarily be noticed by some people, but that just doesn't quite sit right with me in these books, is that there are several conversations about homosexuality, and so far there have been like no gay characters. There have been like a couple of minor gay characters who have appeared in like one scene each, and who have had like one character in particular, something horrible happens to him to show that one of the other characters, I've already talked about spoilers, I'm just going to talk plainly now. So there's a character called Seth, who is one of the priests, and the Holy Father uses him to like make an example of, to show that he won't tolerate like sinful behaviour, essentially just to show that he's like a bad guy. And then Kelsey is like shown to be fine with homosexuality and supportive of it, or just like doesn't care, it doesn't faze her, she doesn't mind, as like most people should be. But it's clearly used as an example to show that Kelsey is good or caring or open, and that the Holy Father is like bad, and unforgiving and harsh and is really set in his ways, which is fine. But then they don't, like I said, there are no actual prominent like main or even secondary gay characters at this point. Maybe it will come out later that there are. I'm like almost halfway through the second book, but up until this point there have been no prominent gay characters, just minor characters who, like Seth in particular, had something horrible happen to him. And it's just a bit like, they have these conversations about homosexuality, they use this minor character who hasn't had anything else to do in the story, just in this one horrible moment, to show that the Holy Father is violent and, yeah, not a nice guy. And it's just like, these conversations and these like minor characters are almost being used as props for the story and for other characters, just to show how other characters act. And it just, I just don't like that. It would be different if there were several gay characters who had stuff to do in the main plot of the story and who had like their own moments and development and stuff to do within the story, but so far we've not got that. Like I said, maybe characters will be, I don't know, revealed to be gay. But yeah, it's something that's not quite sitting right with me. I sort of don't know what to think of this series because the plot isn't like twisty and turny and stuff like that, but I also, as I'm reading, feel like I don't know what is going on in terms of like the dual timelines. I don't know what is up with that, and I don't know where it's going. Like there's obviously like a next step, like they have to solve this problem, the Mort army are invading, like there's obvious things that are going to happen, but I'm always like, what is gonna happen though? Like where is this all leading? Which I'm very near the end of the second book now, and by that point I would sort of expect a reveal or an idea of where it's going, but I don't have that yet. I mean, maybe there will be some revelation at the very end, and then the third book will be the culmination of everything and the fallout, but at this point I still don't know where this is going, which on the one hand makes me feel like wonder if I'm missing something, but on the other hand it's exciting because like, yeah, I want to keep reading because I don't know where it's going, but we will see. But yeah, I'm very near the end of the second book and things are coming to a head, and yeah, I will update you when I finished this book and when I'm ready to go on to the third one. Yesterday morning I finished reading The Invasion of the Tearling. What are my thoughts? I don't think I enjoyed it quite as much as the first one. It wasn't bad, I still enjoyed it, but I didn't like it as much as the first one. I think because even though the first one has, like, mainly focuses on Kelsey and her point of view, but also we do see other characters like Javel and Hall, I think, although that might just be this one. We get perspectives from other characters. You do see bits, like whether it's half a chapter, just like a couple of pages. We dip into other characters to get their perspectives, which is, I think, quite good because you then see like other characters' perspectives on Kelsey and on like the country and her being a queen and ruling. So I find that interesting. This one delves a lot into other perspectives, mainly a character called Lily, which is which takes place like pre-crossing, and I don't know how I felt about those because it was, yeah, those elements more dystopian, if anything, and whilst it gave more context to like the crossing and how the world came to be like this, and while I did get more into that perspective as the book went on and as I read that perspective more, I got more into it, but I was never fully sold on that perspective, and I just didn't enjoy it as much every time we had that perspective. I was always like, okay, but when are we gonna get back to Kelsey? So purely for that reason, because that was quite a focus of this book, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one. Sorry, my throat's gone all yeah, I have a bit more mixed feelings on this one. Also, I would like to give a warning that even though there are mentions of these elements in the first book, I never felt that it was that prominent in terms of homophobia and violence surrounding that, and sexual assault and rape. While they were mentioned, I think, in parts in the first one, and some not very nice descriptions given, this one definitely had more of that. This one, I think, was, even though we had those, I don't know if it was darker than the first one, actually, because the first one has quite a dark ending. Yeah, just in general, it's quite a dark, heavy topics, either depicted on page or spoken about. So I have one book left, which is The Fate of the Tearling. I'm looking forward to reading it, but I'm going to take a break like I did when I read the first one. I then read a couple of other things in between before I started this one, so I'm going to do that again. I also don't want it to affect my judgment too much, but I have heard that people say the series doesn't end brilliantly, and that they're not a huge fan of how the third book goes. But I'm trying to keep an open mind. I think Kelsey's quite a complex character, and although everything she does is to a good end, like, she's aiming for good, and I think that is always her actual intent, she does make some choices that are questionable. So I'm sort of assuming that perhaps a choice she makes or something like that is going to be the thing that maybe upsets people at the end. Yeah, I am looking forward to reading the third one, but because they are quite heavy and also just generally like quite thick, I do think I want to read maybe like a small short, quick contemporary or a romance or something in between, just to break things up a bit. But when I start the third one, I will obviously continue this video and let you know my thoughts about that book probably throughout, and then at the end my thoughts of the entire series and how it all gels together, and whether I think it's like cohesive and a good story plot overall. So yeah, I will update you when I start the next one. I have now started the third and final book that I own in the Queen of the Tearling, or just the Tearling trilogy, The Fate of the Tearling. I know that there's, I think, like a novella that comes somewhere in the series, but I don't own it. I might look out for it, have a look online. But anyway, I'm always nervous when I go into the final book in a series because I worry about how it's going to end. I just want to say I've literally just read like the prologue, so I'm hardly into this, but when I am further in, I will update you if there's anything particular that I feel the need to comment on or whatever. Yes, so final book in the trilogy, here we go. I've reached part 2, which means I'm like 195 pages in, I think.
I don't know how I feel about it right now, because I feel like other than getting a bit more backstory, having a few more flashbacks to like way before the story was about Kelsey and stuff like that, nothing's really happened to move the plot along particularly. And also, in the previous books, whilst we did have other perspectives from other characters, it mainly focused on Kelsey. She mainly drove the story, and then we had other perspectives to flesh out the world and give us a bit more insight into certain aspects of the world and get perspectives on other characters, how other characters viewed each other, stuff like that, which I liked. But so far in this book, being nearly 200 pages in, we've had Kelsey's perspective 3 times, I think, and maybe 4 times, and out of those, I think the longest perspective was like a few pages, which I find really weird that suddenly there's this shift in the final book, which should be the culmination of Kelsey's story, that I'm a third of the way through, more than a third of the way through, and yeah, the focus has not been on Kelsey, like hardly at all. So I'm sort of wondering where this is going. I don't know how it's going to end. So I am intrigued from that point of view, but I am hoping we get a bit more of Kelsey again, because you know, that's what I went into this trilogy thinking it was about, her. And of course, like all the synopses talk about Kelsey as if she's the protagonist, which she is. So I feel like we need more of her perspective to tie up her story, however that may go. Yeah, I'll update you again when things change. Another update. I've not updated in a few days. I've been reading like on and off, because I've not been well. I won't get into it, but I've not been well, so I've not really been in the mood to read. Because like one of the things is like I've been feeling very spacey, so finding it difficult to concentrate on much, like when I have to really focus and like read something myself. So I've just been watching a lot of Disney Plus, and recently Sabrina the Teenage Witch has been added to Amazon Prime, so I've been watching that. Anyway, I'm now just over 100 pages from the end, and it's difficult because maybe it is because I've been reading it on and off and like reading in small bits and pieces here and there, that may have affected my enjoyment of it, the way in which I'm reading, which in that case is not the book's fault. It's like on me in the way I've been reading it. And maybe if I had just sat down, been able to sit down and read like a whole chunk and finish it in like 1 or 2 goes, maybe I'd be enjoying it more than I am. We are getting more of Kelsey's perspective. When it sort of hit the halfway mark, we got more of Kelsey, which I'm
glad about. And now the characters, like the main characters like Kelsey and Lazarus and other important prominent characters are like meeting back up again, which is good, which I think may be my main issue with this final book, and is an issue I find a lot in like TV shows and other books, that when it comes to like the final series or a penultimate series, when they're building to something, I feel like a lot of the time they, like writers, showrunners, people in charge of series, will separate the core cast or the core like group of characters, and they'll all like have their own thing going on in order to like wrap up all the storylines. But often what I like so much about a series is the characters. Like I do need a plot in order to enjoy a story, but I'm more of a character driven person. Like I can enjoy a story that's mostly based on character and their interactions, and then there can be a little plot and I'll still enjoy it. Whereas something that is entirely about the plot, where I don't really care about the characters, I find much more difficult to get through. So I'm very invested in character, and if you then separate all the characters that I care about, and I care about like as a group or as pairings, or I care about their interactions, if you separate all those characters so they're no longer interacting and they can't communicate with each other and they don't know what each other are up to, I find that difficult, which I think may be my main problem with this final book, is that I'm a little over 100 pages left, and it's only now that like the main players are all reuniting. Also, we're only just over 100 pages left, and there's still a fair amount that needs to be wrapped up. And in my saying that, I still don't know what the end goal is now, because like what I thought was going to be like the big bad or whatever of books 1 and 2, and I thought we were leading to this confrontation between the kingdoms, sort of isn't applicable anymore. We obviously have like a different villain instead. We have like the Dark Thing, we have Rofin, and that needs to be dealt with. But I'm a bit like, that needs to be dealt with. They need to sort out the Tearling, and we've got like Father Tyler and Ace's chapters, perspectives within that, and Javel, who, I mean, their storylines may very well all come together, but we've got that, and then we've got like, I don't know, a potential big bad to defeat, and I sort of don't know where it's going, and that seems like a lot for the last 100 pages. Yeah, I don't know. I'll finish it and I will update you with my final thoughts on this book, and then I'll do like a final thoughts on the whole trilogy. Yes, so let me go read. Okay, I finished The Fate of the Tearling last night, and I have some thought. Do I? Saying I have some thoughts, do I have thoughts?
I mean, I do, but I don't know how to articulate them brilliantly. I will say that I previously spoke about how I'd heard that the ending, or like the final book, was not widely liked by a lot of people, and I think the last clip I did was I was just over 100 pages from the end, and I was sort of reading it going, is the reason people don't like it the reasons I'd mentioned, like Kelsey wasn't in it as much, the characters hadn't interacted a ton, and so I was thinking, are those the reasons that people don't like it? But while those were like some stuff that kind of bothered me, I didn't quite see why it would make people like hate the book by any means. And then I got to the last chapter, which I can see why people do not like the ending. I feel like it's supposed to be a bittersweet ending, and it is, but I mostly just found it frustrating and then like quite sad, actually. I know I've been talking about spoilers of all 3 books, but I won't spoil the very end like explicitly. I'm going to try and be vague, so if you do still want to read the series, you won't be like spoiled for the final ending. But yeah, I was just left feeling a bit like, oh, okay. Yeah, I found it quite sad, and I was disappointed by the ending. It sort of, I don't want to criticize Erika Johansen, and like, because it's her story, she can write whatever she wants, but it felt like throughout all the books we were building to this really like climactic point, and it was all like politics and magic, and while those were like prevalent in the end, it sort of felt like she built to this point and then didn't know how to wrap it up, like tie everything together. And so even though I wasn't 100% on where it was going, towards the end I thought, oh, she's gonna do this certain thing, which she did, but I thought, oh, and she'll do this thing and it will like go in this direction, following on from like how I felt like it had been building up. But instead it was sort of building, and then she just went, and I'm gonna do this, and then it's gonna go this way, and I was like, what? Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the ending. It just felt a bit like, what? I don't want to say what was it all for, because the way it ended like was what it was all for, but I was also sort of like, why? I don't know, I felt so connected to the characters, and then the way it ended, just in the final book as a whole, like we didn't spend a ton of time with the characters I love. Like some of them got quite nice story arcs, and others I thought we were going somewhere and then we like didn't, or they just like were hardly in it. I can't even be mad in the like, oh, my favourite characters died and I didn't like the way that this went or this went, because it was just so not what I was expecting that I'm still a bit like, I just don't know. I just don't know. But yeah, let's talk about things I did like in this series as a whole. I liked the building politics. I liked the strategy. I liked that we got lots of different character perspectives, so that it like built the world. Some perspectives I did like more than others. Particularly, I really liked Father Tyler. I thought he was very interesting, and I really liked Ewan. I think he was such a lovely character. And other characters are very complex backstories. That's something else I liked. I liked that most of the characters were morally grey, morally ambiguous, or even if they were good, they had flaws, or if they were bad, they had some, like, not redeeming quality, but there was something about them that made them more than just an out-and-out baddie. So I enjoyed that. I think there were a lot of complex characters, some that I would have liked to know more about. So I think Erika Johansen can write an interesting character. In terms of ranking the books, I'm just going to talk about the books as a whole now. In terms of ranking the books, I do think that the first one is my favourite. I loved the world building, I loved the intrigue, I was very here for this. And these two, it's difficult because I enjoyed Kelsey and like the Kelsey's present day storyline more in the second book. But in terms of the secondary flashback stories, I enjoyed Katie's storyline more than Lily's. But I enjoyed the Kelsey present day stuff less in this one. But I think I'd probably still put this second and this one last, just because of the ending. I never really felt connected to Lily as a character. I felt for her in certain moments, but I never felt connected to her, whereas I quite liked Katie. Although even then there were moments in this that I didn't think were very in character. There's a couple of, to be kind of spoilery, a couple of sex scenes, which I'm all for a sex scene if I think it makes sense for the plot, makes sense for the characters, or is just fun. And the sex scenes in this are like two of my favourite tropes. There's a sex scene between two characters who like hate each other, and they do it purely to like as a physical manifestation of their like anger and rage and dislike for each other just comes out in this sex scene. Do I think that's healthy in real life? No. Can I enjoy it in a piece of media? Yes. But I don't think it worked in here. I literally had to like reread the page leading up to it because I was like, is this what's happening? I don't. Why? And then the other sex scene was like two characters thinking they're gonna die and knowing that they don't have much time left and sort of just doing it as a last way to connect to someone else, which again I think is a really interesting dynamic. But again in here I just didn't feel it. So yeah, that was a slight something that I didn't quite enjoy. But it wasn't like, it didn't bother me massively. It was just a bit like, don't know that character would do that kind of thing. That's my final ranking. I just keep knocking my camera. So that's my final ranking. The first book is my favourite. the second book is my second favourite, and the third book was my least favourite, but all still enjoyable. And I do also wonder if the third book, my enjoyability was like hindered because it took me so long to read it, and when I was like finishing it up, I wasn't feeling well, so that may have impacted my enjoyment. So yes, would I recommend this series? Yes, I would. I think if you like politics and very political strategy, queendom based fantasy with like interesting magic, the first two books had that a lot. The final book, I think if you go into this knowing that the end is controversial and that you may hate it, I think you can get past that. Because while I am still like disappointed going into this knowing that I could possibly hate the ending, I think I'd like prepared myself for something to happen that I wasn't gonna like. Whereas if I'd just gone into it thinking, last book in a series, I've really enjoyed the series so far, can't wait to finish it, and then I'd read the ending, I think I'd be more pissed off than I am. But also I will say, if you like, this one felt quite different in tone to the others, but this one had some kind of like horror elements. There were a few scenes in this that I actually thought were quite creepy. So if you like that kind of thing, this is all quite like hard-hitting stuff in all of these books. So I will just do some like trigger warnings and content warnings, because I see this series talked about and put on lists of young adult fantasy. It is not. While I may have read this when I was a teenager, like I can see myself having read it when I was a teenager, it is adult fantasy. And I think it just gets put on those lists because I think female fantasy writers often get put on young adult lists, even if they're adult writers, like writing adult books. And I think because the protagonist is 19, people think that it's a teen book. It's not. I'm going to use some content warnings. These are the things I can think of off the top of my head. Violence, for starters, murder. Some of that stuff is described in detail and is quite gory. There's a lot of violence and sexual assault, and I think one or two depictions on page of sexual assault and rape towards women, and then there's lots of mention of it towards women and children as well. There's one character who is a child, who's like a young teen, and her backstory is all about being abused as a child, and so you see other characters through that. So yeah, big trigger warning for those. Trigger warnings for alcohol and drug use and addiction within those. I think I've talked about it before, but mentions and like physical violence to do with homophobia. Mentions of suicide, I think. Yeah, those are the ones that come to the top of my head, but there's like, yeah, trigger warnings and content warnings for like every bad thing you can think of is probably somewhere in these books, whether it's on page described or just mentioned or sort of hinted at. Yeah, there's a lot of not nice stuff in these books. That's not me saying they're not nice books, like you shouldn't read them. Just if any of those things would bother you, either go into these books with care and take that into consideration, or maybe they're just not for you, which is completely understandable. I just wanted to let you know that these are definitely adult books. So yes, I would still recommend them if you think you can read those things and not be okay, but like handle them. Yeah, I think I would still recommend the series overall. I'm glad I read these books. I've also had them on my TBR shelf for such a long time that I'm glad that I think over like 2 months, while reading other books in between, I got through these. It's nice to like have them done. I do think maybe in the future I would revisit them once I've like got over the ending, and maybe if I read them more straight through, I might pick up on some extra things, or you know, having less interrupted reading might improve my reading experience of the series as a whole. But overall, I'd say like the series as a whole, like 3.5 4-star series. Yeah, it's got me in the mood to read more high fantasy, dystopian, utopian-esque, like political fantasy, which I'm excited about because I have a few more books that have those elements on my TBR, so I feel like I'm gonna get to them sooner now rather than later. So that is it for my Tearling trilogy reading vlog. I hope you enjoyed. I hope maybe I've swayed you one way or another into picking up the series. Have you read the series before? Do you think you're going to pick it up now? Do you think maybe you're not going to bother? I would love to know your opinion, your thoughts on these books. If you read them, did you like the ending? Or did you hate it? I'm very conflicted about everything. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!